Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors, your source in the field for local outdoor news. It's a beautiful morning, and as you can see, we're in some incredible country. I'm going to show you all about it this week on Jared Scott Outdoors. To get to the Copper Basin, you'll want to head into central Idaho. Go to Arco, and then head north on Highway 93 past Mackey. Then you'll take a west on Trail Creek Road. Just after the road turns to dirt, you'll head south into the Copper Basin. At this point, you better know where you're going because the Copper Basin is so big with so many canyons, trailheads, and high mountain lakes that there's many different places you can venture in. As I mentioned, we were heading to the Boulder Lake area, which meant we'd stay to the northwest part of the basin and really didn't have to travel too much further before making it to the trailhead. To our surprise, there were no other vehicles at the trailhead. As popular as the Copper Basin is, and it being a Friday, that was odd. However, we did find that by Saturday afternoon, the parking lot was nearly full. There was no reason to wait, so with everyone ready, we headed off up the trail. Right off the bat, we ran into our first snag, Wild Horse Creek. There's no bridge, and so the only thing to do is just walk across. I hate wet shoes, especially when I'm wearing nice hiking boots and we're at the start of the hike. So the only thing to do is take them off, roll up the pant legs, and get across.
At least they're really slick.
Yeah.
And my feet are like baby feet and sensitive or something.
While the water actually felt very nice and refreshing, jamming my toes in among all the slick rocks seemed to be what I noticed the most.
Alright, so we're across the river now. Everybody's got their shoes on and we're good to go. So it's a little cloudy on today, which is good. It'll keep it cooler for us on the hike up, and it's looking like this can be some pretty stuff. So let's get up the trail and see what it's like.
With our shoes back on, we headed on up the trail. At first it was just a very flat trail as it crossed over the Wild Horse Creek Basin until we got to the other side and started heading up Boulder Creek Basin. As soon as we got to the canyon, the trail took an immediate jump in elevation as suddenly it turned into switchbacks.
We should be gaining about 2,000 feet to get to the meadows below all the lakes. So 2,000 feet in about 3 miles. So decent elevation gain.
Rylee, who just turned 12, was the youngest on this trip, and this was his first overnight backpacking experience. While he had done lots of day hikes, this was the first time he had to pack so much weight on his back. The switchbacks were wearing him down, but he kept plugging right along. Here you can see Devil's Bedstead, which is the prominent peak directly above the lakes we were heading to. Being able to see it gave us an idea of our destination and how far we still had to hike. With the first mile behind us, the trail leveled off significantly. At least for this part, it became a pretty easy hike as we covered ground quickly.
Well, this is my first backpacking trip, and we're heading up to Boulder Lake #2, and I've been having fun so far, so hopefully the rest of the trip is fun.
Eventually the trail that had been higher up on the canyon side, after all those switchbacks, crossed Boulder Creek. After crossing the bridge, the trail takes another jump in elevation gains as it steepens significantly and hits some pretty aggressive switchbacks.
We were moving on pretty good. We've hit another switchback section where we're gaining some serious elevation.
This last push up these switchbacks was tough, but the end was getting closer, so we just kept pushing forward. Once the terrain opens up, you'll know you're close. It's still pretty tight and rocky right down to the creek, but just hang in there because another quarter mile up the trail, it turns into lush meadowy country where the creek meanders through the brush, creating pools with some pretty brook trout that dart away as soon as they see you. This is where it's time to find a camping area, as all the lakes are set up high in the rocks above.
So we finally made it up to the spot. It's been a pretty hike, going through different terrain. Nice and pretty, got steep rock hills on either side of us and going through pines. It's a pretty area.
Basically, these lakes are up here in a big bowl. We've got rock, just steep granite peaks surrounding us, and then we've got Boulder Lake over here, Washington Lake over here, Boulder Creek Lake number 2, and Boulder Creek Lake number 1, way up in that high rocky stuff up above us. And so the only place to camp is down here in the meadows if you want any trees and whatnot. So we're kind of at that point where we've got to find somewhere to camp. We'll set up, and then we can kind of pick which lakes we want to head off into and go do some fishing.
We found a good spot to camp, so we'll get that set up and then head out for some fishing.
All right, so we're here at camp. We're all set up, and in this valley here, it's kind of cool. We've got the Devil's Bedstead up there. That's definitely the highest peak in this area. And then back over here, we've got Boulder Lake, and then Boulder Creek Lake number 1, Boulder Creek Lake number 2, and Washington Lake back there. So you can just see this big bowl that we're in, and just a beautiful area. So we've got camp set up. We're going to grab our poles now, head up, and go fishing. The biggest decision is just which lake to go to first.
The first lake we wanted to try was Boulder Lake. If you stay on the trail, it'll take you right to it. Just follow the trail through the rest of the meadowy part of the basin, through the trees until it gets out of the trees and into the rocks. Then you have a very steep portion of the trail that climbs up several hundred feet to the lake hidden above. Looking across the basin, you can see a waterfall cascading down the steep rocky basin. The waterfall's not too far below Boulder Creek Lake number 2, and we'd be checking that one out later in the day.
What do you think, Rye? Why do you think they call it Boulder Lake?
There's a bunch of boulders.
You sure?
Yes.
I don't know.
Continuing on up the trail through some scenic water features, we finally topped out at the outlet of Boulder Lake. Looking across the lake, it was indeed a beautiful setting. Now it was time to see if the hard work had paid off as we got excited about pulling out the fishing gear.
Well, we're at Boulder Lake now, and this trip I'm hoping to get my first fish on a fly rod, so hopefully I have a good day.
We chose to hike around to the back side of the lake as it had a little more open space for Rylee to learn how to cast his fly rod. Here you can see the view from this angle and how it seemed we were in the tops of the mountains. After helping Rylee get set up, I threw my own line in and set the hook right off the bat.
I'll tell you what, I did one cast. Put on a green and black woolly bugger, one cast. Stripped it in a few times and hooked up.
You usually don't expect a high mountain trout to be big, and this wasn't. But it's still just as fun to fight the little guys in after the hard work of hiking all the way up to the lake.
There you go, just a pretty little cutthroat there. You can see the nice marking there. Maybe an 8 or 9 incher. There he goes. Caught on a woolly bugger.
With Rylee having a tougher time casting the big woolly bugger, I decided to swap him out to a lighter dry fly. So while I worked on switching him out, he kept trying to catch another cutthroat with mine. Then with his all ready, I gave his a quick cast.
Alright, so as Rylee was trying to use that woolly bugger on mine, I set his up. I figured I'd set him up with a nice little dry fly, elk hair caddis. Because you can see him, he can cast those easier. And sure enough, cast it out, and wham! This one's actually a pretty nice one here. Pretty good fight there too. Wow, he's kicking in.
He's a good fighter.
Just when you think you got him, he dives in again. So there you are. Just a pretty fish there. Right there on that elk hair caddis, so nice fight. Man, busted out of there. So there you go, one off a dropper and one off a dry. You gotta like that, especially dry fly fishing. Of course, that's always fun. So now it's Rylee's turn.
Rylee kept at it, but after those first 2 bites, neither of us could get much interest at all from the fish. Eventually, however, another couldn't resist and smacked the fly.
Alright, so one more. It's been a good half hour with nothing. It's kind of crazy. You can see him hitting around, but pretty good fighter out there. Switching flies. I actually stuck a stone fly on with a Prince Nymph dropper. Had one hit the Prince Nymph just a minute ago, and now this one hit the stone fly, smacked it. Rylee hasn't gotten anything. Nathan hasn't gotten anything yet. From the other fishermen I'm seeing, it's pretty slow overall. So, guess I'm grateful for my 3 that I've got. Yeah, pretty fish up here in the mountains. They got some spunk. Anyhow, just a beautiful setting up here to be catching fish in. Out with my sons and having a good old time.
John came our way and quickly hooked one himself, and while talking smack to Nate, Nate hooked up as well. John made sure to jest and tell Nathan he caught the big one, but it looked like Nathan's was a pretty good fish. The bite seemed to be picking up as John caught a few more and Nathan did the same.
Out here, I've been catching and missing a lot of fish. It's just a fun place up here.
With Rylee still unable to catch his first trout on a fly, we decided to head off to the other lakes while we still had a little daylight left. That required hiking back down the trail a bit and then going cross country across the basin to that rocky slope I showed you earlier with the waterfall cascading down. Leaving the trails and heading cross country, while harder at times, for me always seems more fun. Of course, bumping a young mule deer buck out of its daybed right in front of us was just icing on the cake. Eventually the buck ran off and we continued on in the direction of the Boulder Creek Lakes. One thing was for sure, as we traversed the top end of this high mountain basin, it was easy to see why years ago someone called it the Boulder Basin. Giant boulders were strewn all over below us. Once to the other side, we were left with our next decision, how to get up that rocky face to the lakes high above us. We were pretty sure there was a faint trail up to the lakes that started a mile or so back down the canyon, but from where we were, it was going to have to just be a rock scramble. The first part was easy enough as we just rock hopped our way up for a while, but then it steepened up a fair amount, and in just a matter of minutes, it turned into a hike that required all fours at times. Then it got even more steep. With the water coming from above, there was a lot of bushes and such growing through the rock. Whether this helped out or not, I don't know. But we were just slowly working our way up through the cracks in the bushes, using our hands to hold on and even pull ourselves up at times. It was more than we expected for sure, but at the same time, it was kind of fun.
Go left, don't grab that rock. Hands and knees, there you go. Heading up to this spot is a lot harder than I thought. It's very, very steep.
Making it on top, we found more rock. It was just big open country, out of the trees for the most part, and pretty rugged. The first Boulder Creek Lake was a short hike to our north from here, and so we made quick work of getting to it. We were under the impression it was fishless, and sure enough, as we looked the lake over, it was. However, there were still critters that called this lake home, and that was salamanders. It took a little looking to find them, but sure enough, we were able to spot a few just out of reach in the water.
We made it to Boulder Creek Lake number 1, and it's a fishless lake. It just has long-toed salamanders in here.
We were running out of time, so we headed off for Boulder Creek Lake number 2. There's no trail that connects the two, so you have to have an idea of where to go beforehand. To get there, we knew it was southwest, and so we headed off in that direction. Of course, that meant we had to hike another several hundred feet up in elevation. Again, it was more rock scrambling, and we were getting pretty tired after all the day's hikes. But we made it and found that this lake had fish, as proved by the trout we could see surfacing as we walked up to it. As we were pretty limited with time, we hurried to get our fishing gear out. Rylee was pretty optimistic that he was going to catch a fish here. Using a spinner, John hooked up right off the bat.
Finally. Taking me 2 weeks, but finally got my first fish on a fly rod. I was drifting a pheasant tail with a little bobber thing on it. So when that bobber twitched, I knew I had one. Well, I got my first fish off of a fly rod on a high mountain lake, and it's a beautiful cutthroat. You can see the marks right there, and even though he's small, since he's my first fish on a fly rod, I'm going to eat him tonight.
This is my first fish up here at Boulder Creek, lake number 2. Caught off of a woolly bugger. He's a pretty good fighter. There he is. Not very big, but still fun to come up here and catch him.
So I am the last one here to finally hook a fish. Fishing's not too bad, it's not on fire by any means, but for this little lake we are catching some fish. This again is a woolly bugger that I got this one off of. So far they all seem to be kind of the same, just the same size, pretty healthy looking. But just the standard size right there, just pretty fish. Good fight to him. So we're enjoying it. It's an overcast day, a little chilly, but just an incredible setting to be out here.
Fish on.
We fished for another 20 minutes or so and caught a handful more. Some were on flies, but they couldn't seem to resist the spinners. Overall, it was a fun lake to fish and a beautiful area to explore.
Off he goes.
Got another fish. I just got one off the spinner. I just switched and I got one to cast before, but it broke off really close to shore.
It's a good fish.
Definitely better than the first lake we were at, where I couldn't get anything.
Well, there you go. We came up here into the Copper Basin and hiked into some beautiful country, fished some really pretty scenic lakes, and just had overall a good time. So it's the next day now, another beautiful day out here in Idaho's backcountry. And that's going to wrap it up for now. I've got my pole. I'm going to actually go and fish this creek now because there's some beautiful brook trout in there. But for that, I'm going to put the camera away and just enjoy some fishing. So either way, tune in next week at the same time for another episode of Jared's Got Outdoors.